Good morning. Hey, that was pretty good, guys. You are getting better at this. Good morning. It's great to be here, isn't it? It's great to be here to worship God together, to sing praises, to hear from His Word, to partake of the body of Christ. This morning we're continuing our series that we began last week, Generation to Generation, Becoming Like Christ Together. Looking at what it means to be formed in the image of Christ by existing within community with one another. When thinking about community, we can think about groups, and our culture loves grouping, segmenting, classifying people. We have groups for all different kinds. We've got political groupings, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. We have age groupings, college, young adult, middle age, old, very old. We got generational groupings, Gen X, Gen Z, Boomer, Silent, Millennial. We have all these groupings. Even the stores we shop at have groupings. Members and non-members, or better yet, some stores plus members, for when being a regular member isn't good enough. We have all these groupings, and Christianity isn't immune to this. Christianity, we got Catholic, Protestant, or we can break that down further, Vatican II Catholic, pre-Vatican II Catholic, Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, Presbyterian, or we can even go further. Sometimes people want to go further, even in the denominations. You got the One-Cupper Church of Christ. You got the Instrumental Church of Christ. You got us somewhere in the middle somewhere. And we have all these groupings. And we love classifying people. And it's only natural. This is how we think. This is how we process large amounts of information. We have these groups. But groupings become problematic when we begin to make generalizations based on them. Our world's much too messy for that, and when we try to force people into the conceptual boxes we create, we treat them unjustly. Instead, we must encounter individuals as individuals. Meet them on their own terms. But sadly, this tendency to group and segment people is ingrained within our culture and in our churches. For example, when we look at schools, we segregate by age. We separate by age. And churches tend to follow this mentality. When we teach by age. And we've assumed that if people are at the same age, they must be at the same spiritual level. That if people are the same age, they must be at the same spiritual level. And while there are benefits to this age-specific learning, and there's reasons we do that, and it's good, churches are also beginning to realize the consequences of overemphasizing that model of formation. Think with me for a moment that if you take all the people the same age, same maturity level, and you put them with people their own age, their own maturity level, how do you expect them to grow beyond that maturity level? We're not only formed by information, but we're formed by the people with whom we interact. We're formed by those around us. And this is especially true with faith. Being formed in faith, that is, being transformed and conformed to the image of Christ, is not like teaching math in school. Faith is not mere knowledge. Faith is not just a set of principles that we must assent to. Rather, it's something informed within us. And that formation happens in community. In the book we looked at last week by Allen and Ross, they write, social interaction is crucial for the cognitive, moral, psychosocial, and faith development. When persons of any generation are perennially present only with those who inhabit their own developmental level, it is more difficult to progress to the next stage of development. Now, that seems like a very simple point, but it's something that we often overlook in how we structure our faith formation. If we seek to be formed in faith, to be transformed into the image of Christ, then existing and participating within an intergenerational group of believers, a group made up of all ages, is essential for our faith formation. As we'll see this morning, Scripture presumes, it takes for granted, that an intergenerational community of believers is the key place where faith formation takes place. To be God's people means to be present, living together with all ages and generations. Our text this morning is Deuteronomy chapter 29, if you want to turn there. Deuteronomy 29. To set the context, the Israelites are on the edge of the promised land, waiting to enter. Moses is not allowed, and thus, as Moses, at the beginning of chapter 29, Moses begins his farewell discourse. He's giving his farewell speech, and he reminds in the first 9 verses of all that God has done for the people of Israel to bring them here. Reminds them of God's faithfulness to His people. And then we begin here in Deuteronomy 29, beginning in verse 9. Give ear to the word of God. So keep the words of this covenant to do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. You stand today, all of you, before the Lord your God. Your chiefs, your tribes, your elders, your officers, even all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and the alien who is within your camps. For one who chops wood to the one who draws water, that you may enter into the covenant with the Lord your God and into His oath which the Lord your God is making with you today, in order that He may establish you today as His people, and that He may be your God, just as He spoke to you and swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. He says, not with you alone am I making this covenant and this oath, but both with those who stand here today in the presence of the Lord our God, and with those who are not here with us today. This is a powerful passage. There's a lot here that can be easy for us to overlook. There's a lot going on here. But in general, what this passage is doing is it's teaching us what it means to be the people of God, what it takes for us to be God's people. Moses begins with charging the people with the command, keep the covenant. Keep the covenant that you may prosper. Now we have to ask, what is covenant? What is covenant? Now broadly speaking, covenant is a contract, an agreement between two parties, in this case between the people and God. Though we should also say that covenant involves the relationships among the people themselves as well. And covenant involves an oath of commitment. And covenant also includes rules and regulations that govern the life of the community of the people involved in the covenant. It includes rules and structures that govern our relations, the covenant people's relationships and interactions with each other. Rules that guard and protect community life. Now, our society as a whole trains us not, we hear words like rules and commitment, we don't like them very much. Our society trains us naturally to have commitment issues. But covenant is opposite of that. You know, even with church, we have commitment issues. If you don't like something that happens at the church, you can just church shop and go to the church down the street. But this is the complete opposite of covenant. Covenant involves that binding oath, loyalty to a particular people. And we also tend to not like rules, but without structures, there can be no community. Only chaos. Rules protect the communal life. Structures guard the community. Without them, there's only chaos. But covenant is not merely this set of rules and regulations, this commitment to each other. Covenant is also an act of God. God's covenant with His people is the incarnation of God's loving faithfulness. God's covenant with His people is the incarnation of God's loving faithfulness, God's steadfast love. Covenant is the concrete expression of God's faithfulness and loyalty to His people. And because God binds Himself by oath to us, He expects us to, in turn, follow suit, to commit to serving and following Him. So Moses, all throughout the rest of the book of Deuteronomy, has just laid out all the rules and regulations of the covenant people. And then he brings us to this passage and he calls them to keep this covenant. And here's where we come to our key focus this morning. Look at verses 10 through 13. Notice who's involved in this covenant. Notice how specific Moses gets. We're going to read it again. You stand today, all of you, before the Lord your God. Your chiefs, your tribes, your elders, your officers, even all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, the alien who is within your camps, for the one who draws wood to the one who draws water, that you may enter into the covenant with the Lord your God and into His oath which the Lord your God is making with you today, in order, for the purpose that He may establish you as His people. Now Moses lays out in the clearest possible terms who's involved in this covenant. God's covenant is radically inclusive. The covenant is with every member of the community. Our passage lists all ages, all spectrums of society. God's covenant is radically inclusive. Age and accountability are not factors that bar one from covenant. To be a part of the community means to be a member of the covenant. It includes the entire spectrum of society. It erases social hierarchies, be they class or age. All stand on level ground, the plain of Moab. Entering as equals before the Lord their God. For God's people to be complete, Deuteronomy is saying, for God's people to be established, all ages and generations must be present together. The people of God is not complete unless the little ones, the elders are in our midst. Yet, as we saw last week, and with all those articles looking at millennials leaving church, young leaving church, we looked at why this might be the case. We see young leaving church. But if you look at church practice across America, just churches in general across America, we notice that children are not often included in the covenant. Often children are treated as the Canaanite that must be driven from our midst. Now that is not always done benevolently. Many times it's done out of good desire. To let them learn with their age group. Let them be among each other. But just because it's intended well doesn't mean it's always received as it's intended. Children have often expressed, youth and teens, that feeling excluded, alienated, not wanted within the larger life of the church. One strong example of this for me growing up was a phrase I often heard was, the youth are the future of the church. The youth are the future of the church. And while there's some truth to that phrase, because usually the youth will outlive the people saying it, it necessarily includes another message. To say that the youth are the future of the church tells them that they are not the church now. To tell them that they're the future means that you are not the church now. And phrases like this, activities that exclude and alienate the youth receive the message they're not wanted or not welcomed. They become Canaanites of the land. And if these are the messages youth receive, then why should we be surprised that young adults and teens are fleeing church? Most people will not long desire to live in a community in which they are excluded, told implicitly or explicitly they are not wanted, or blamed for society's problems. Not only does exclusion and separation make one feel as aliens and strangers to community, but Deuteronomy 29 teaches us that even to well-meaningly separate is unbiblical. Not to say that they have to be together at all times, but for God's people to be established, for God's people to be formed, the people of God, all ages must be present together. All ages must enter covenant together. When we look at the Old Testament, as we'll see more and more in the coming weeks, children were not sent to a separate class so that the adults could listen well. All gathered together for mutual benefit. And if we desire our children in churches across America to grow up in, be committed members of a covenant community, then they must feel and know that they are essential to the life of that community as it exists today. As Allen and Ross note, persons learn to be members of their community as they actively participate in that particular social community, learning alongside those who are further ahead in the journey. Intergenerational Christian settings are authentic, complex, formative environments made up of individuals at various stages in their faith journey, teaching some and learning from others as they participate in the community of believers. Intergenerationality enables the whole church to benefit from each individual's God-given gifts. It enables believers to fully live out being the body of Christ. For faith to be formed, for us to be conformed and transformed into the image of Christ, all generations need to be gathered together. For us to become established as God's people. And again, as we'll see more and more over the coming weeks, Scripture presumes, it takes for granted that the intergenerational community of believers is the key place where faith formation occurs. And if we're to reverse the trend of children and young adults leaving church, then we must not treat teens and children as Canaanites, who must be neither seen or heard. Children and teens must understand that they are essential to the life of the church as it exists now in the present. They don't have to wait their turn to be the church. You are the church now. The church, the people of God, is not a complete people. The covenant is not formed unless all generations enter together. And only by knowing and believing that they are essential to the life of the church as it exists today in the present will teens and young adults be committed to the church in the future. This is not the only thing Deuteronomy has to teach us. Not only does Deuteronomy 29 teach us the importance of all generations being gathered together for God's people to be established, but it also has something else to teach us. Look at verses 14 and 15. It says, "Not with you alone am I making this covenant and this oath, but with all those who stand here as with us today in the presence of the Lord our God, and those who are not here with us today." Now God says to His people that covenant is not simply inclusive with those present. It includes those not present. God's covenant is not only radically inclusive horizontally across all ages and social classes, but it's radically inclusive vertically across time and space. God's covenant includes those in the past, those present, and those yet unborn. It's significant that today is the Sanctity of Life Sunday, which we begin a fundraiser to support the Choices Clinic here in town. When we enter God's covenant, it includes those generations yet unborn. And to be in covenant with future generations means we must fight for their well-being. God's covenant includes all ages, now and in the future. God's covenant extends across time and space. God's plans far surpass those of any one particular generation. And any time a particular generation claims to be the generation of God's people, the community of God becomes divided. When older generations exclude younger generations, the covenant is transgressed and the people of God is harmed. When younger generations neglect and dismiss older generations, the covenant is transgressed and the community of God is harmed. For God's people to be established, we need all generations present together so that we may learn from one another. Allen and Ross write, "Faith is communicated by a community of believers. And the meaning of faith is developed by its members out of the history, by their interactions with one another, and in relation to the events that take place in their lives. We learn to be the people of God by dwelling among God's people. We learn to be members of the covenant by participating in the covenant." They further write, "Enculturation, being formed into Christ, is a process consisting of lifelong formal and informal mechanisms through which persons sustain and transmit their faith. It requires participation in the life of a tradition-bearing community with all its rites, rituals, myths, and symbols. Faith formation requires participation in an intergenerational group of believers. So to be formed in the image of Christ, to be formed together, we need one another. In the visible Christian community, the church that you have the blessing to be a part of must not be taken for granted. Each generation needs the others, both older and younger, to see what it looks like to practice faith at various stages of life. It is within the intergenerational community of believers that faith is formed. Community is for belonging, and being in community is for growth and development. It is by doing the hard work of living in community with one another that the ego, the self, dies, as we talked about with Jacob this morning. It is living in covenant with one another that we are formed and transformed into the image of Christ. I want to go invite the praise team up. This morning, Deuteronomy teaches us that the entire people of God, made up of all ages and generations, is necessary for faith formation to occur. Our church is only complete, the people of God is only whole when all generations are present together. Only then may we be established as God's people. And so then, this morning, let us commit to dwelling in community with one another. Let us bind ourselves by loyal covenant oath to one another as together we stand and sing.